As we have discussed in previous videos, many of the 1 to 3 diamond cards in Pokémon TCG Pocket reused card arts from a previous set released in the physical TCG. Up to this point, there have been no more than a dozen or so cards reused from each generation of play. This changes with the 4th generation. As of Triumphant Light's release, there are at least 45 different cards that all have their card art carried over. We will not be able to cover all of those in one video, so we'll be splitting up Generation 4 into release years and individual sets where appropriate to keep everything organized. For this first video on Generation 4, we will cover the year 2007 with one card from 2006 in the 4th generation of play, where there are 6 cards in total carried over so far. If you like this content and want to see this series continue, please do like and subscribe. Currently, of our regular viewers, only 7.9% are subscribed. Please subscribe so we can continue to grow the channel. On November 30th, 2006, the first set in the 4th generation, Diamond and Pearl, was released, prominently featuring Pokémon from the Generation 4 games. However, before we move into the card arts, I would like to cover some of the changes we saw as the game moved from the 3rd generation to the 4th generation. First, weakness was no longer a universal 2x multiplier. Now, it ranged from +10 to ×2, depending on the strength of the Pokémon, with the strongest Pokémon retaining the x2 multiplier. Resistances also saw a change from -30 to now -20. Zero energy attacks were added with a hollow energy symbol denoting this, and darkness and metal energies were finally treated like basic energy cards and not limited to 4 per deck. Poison type Pokemon from the games would also now fall under the psychic type cards rather than the grass type. Supporters and stadiums were also now their own special card. However, all of this pales in comparison to the most noticeable change at the time, which was the switch from the Pokemon EX of the 3rd generation to Pokemon Level X. These functioned as a pseudo 3rd stage where the Level X was placed on top of the previous stage. In this instance, the Pokemon Level X retained all the attacks and Pokebodies, or Pokepowers, of their previous stage. The only card so far from this first set that has reappeared in Pocket is Staravia from Triumphant Light. Illustrated by Masakazu Fukuda, this Staravia has seen marginally more play compared to its Space-Time Smackdown variant due to the introduction of the supporter Berry. Berry reduces the attack cost of Snorlax, Heracross, and Staraptor by 2 colorless energy. It's not a very good card, and would have been better if it simply added 2 energy to this assortment of 2 Diamond Pokemon. The reason these 3 are selected for Berry is because they are the 3 non-conditional Pokemon on his team in the Diamond and Pearl games, in that the other 3, Roserade, Rapidash, Floatzel, or Infernape, Torterra, and Empoleon, are dependent on the starter choice of the player. Clearly, Berry is supposed to facilitate a budget deck for this set similar to the supporter Blaine in Genetic Apex. Unfortunately, while there has been some experimenting with Berry alongside Staraptor, it really hasn't broken out into the open. Generally speaking, this is the same experience of Staravia and Diamond and Pearl. We were unable to find a topping list that features Staravia. If you know one, please let us know in the comments. Regardless, it's not difficult to see why Staravia isn't good enough to be played when you have Gallade and Gardevoir as the peak deck at the time of Staravia's release, considering its evolution of Staraptor is really bad as well, with inconsistent damage at a high cost and a potential to KO itself. A few core differences separate the old Staravia and the new Staravia, even though both are set up around their final evolutions. Obviously, Triumphant Light Staravia is meant to play with Berry, such that you gain no benefit from stacking additional energy on Staravia, since Berry makes Staraptor's attack cost 1 energy. On the other hand, Diamond and Pearl Staravia is meant to set up for Staraptor by swapping around bench Pokemon until the one you want is in play, and clutching it so Staraptor can KO it on the evolution. Original Staravia also has no retreat cost, meaning you could also use this utility to set up for a different attacker to come in for free on the switch and KO the opponent's Pokemon. Stat-wise, Staravia trades the Whirlwind and Clutch combo for a simple 30 damage, 1 cost attack in Wing Attack, following the trend of Pocket's simplified game design philosophy. In addition, Staravia gained 10 HP to match the damage creep, though as a result of Diamond and Pearl's changes to the way weaknesses worked, the weaknesses stayed the same for the first time. We will see this gain to HP in all the other cards, and we will not mention it there, as it gets a little bit redundant, but just note that typically there is an added resistance, and there's a little bit of gained HP and a little bit of damage reduction. However, that said, some aspects of Diamond and Pearl Staravia have made it into the game outside of its artwork. Specifically, the attack clutch has been carried over, not in the Triumphant Light Staravia obviously, but in the Space-Time Smackdown Staraptor. While this didn't make Staraptor any more viable, it is interesting to see the difference in design from this ability being on a Stage 1 Pokemon to now being on a Stage 2, reducing its viability due to the opportunity cost of evolution. Effectively, the complexity of locking a Pokemon in the active spot apparently warrants further evolution compared to its counterpart 17 years ago. Mysterious Treasures is the second expansion in the 4th generation, and was released on August 22, 2007. It featured more Generation 4 Pokemon, including Pokemon such as the Lake Guardians, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf. The set also introduced Pokemon that have built-in held items, like Bidoof with its Wakanberry. The first Pokemon from the set we will talk about is Koki Sato's Shieldon. Shieldon is a part of the fossil subset of Pokemon where the Stage 1 Pokemon evolve from specific trainer cards, often with the word fossil in the name. This mechanic has been in play ever since the release of the Fossil expansion during Generation 1, with the advent of the mysterious Fossil Trainer card. In Pocket, Shieldon saw some play in niche Bastiodon stall strategies as a result of its guarded grill ability, which on a coin flip reduces the damage Bastion takes by 100. Both Shieldon and Bastiodon had higher than average HP, with the former at 100 and the latter at 160, which contributed to this niche. However, being a Stage 2 Pokemon limited Bastiodon and by extent, Shieldon's viability due to its natural inconsistency and delay in actually getting the wall set up. Pocket's Shieldon had a basic 50 damage attack for 2 energies, which resulted in attacking on curve. However, the armor fossil it evolved from cannot be searched out and has to be hard drawn, a stipulation that often limits the power of fossil Pokemon. Compared to its debut generation, Shieldon is laughably simple. Mysterious Treasure Shieldon had 2 attacks, Hard Face and Shield Attack. The former dealt 20 damage and reduced any damage dealt to Shieldon by 20, a precursor to Pocket's Bastiodon. The latter attack dealt 40 plus an additional 20 on a coin flip, which is pretty fair for 3 energy, 2 of which are colorless. That said, Shieldon, like the rest of the cards in this list, had no real impact on the meta. In each of the formats that Shieldon was legal, 07 to 08, 08 to 09, 09 to 10, and the first half of 10 to 11, the formats were just too fast for what Shieldon was trying to do. This applies to all of the cards we'll be touching on today, as decks like Gardevoir and Gallade were just too consistent and too powerful for much of the metagame. If you didn't have a favorable matchup into those two, you weren't doing anything in early Generation 4 format. And as the format developed, SP Pokemon were released, which we'll talk about in a later video, and these provided aggressive decks with strong basic Pokemon by which to overwhelm slower evolution-focused decks like Shieldon. As such, we have yet to see a list playing this card, but if you're aware of one, please do send it our way. The next Pokemon from Mysterious Treasures is the Mythical Island Executor, illustrated by Masakazu Fukuda. In Pocket, this card suffered the same fate as the Genetic Apex Executor in that it was completely overshadowed by the Executor EX released in the prior set. That said, this Executor is set up to benefit from Superior's Jungle Totem ability, in that, turn 1, you would use the Execute from Mythical Island to pump another grass energy onto it after the first turn, and then have Superior doubling that energy, so it can start cracking for roughly 100 to 120. This is because its attack, Psychic, costs 4 energy and does 80 damage plus 20 more for each energy attached to the opposing Pokemon. And in 2 turns, that would be at most 2 energy, unless there's some form of ramp like Misty at play. However, in Mysterious Treasures, Executor functioned a lot more like Celebi EX does in Pocket, with a few upgrades. Executor's String Bomb attack deals damage based on the total number of basic energy attached to both Executor and the opponent's Pokemon, unlike Celebi EX, who deals damage only based on the energy attached to Celebi. This requires only a single colorless energy, which would make this Pokemon completely broken in Pocket. Not only that, the second attack, Nutritional Support, attaches 2 grass energy to any Pokemon in any way you like. This means you can turn to evolve an Executor, attach a grass energy, and Nutritional Support to add 2 more. Then follow up with flipping, at most, 6 heads, with 4 from you and 2 from your opponent to deal up to a whopping 180 damage. In the event you don't want Executor carrying you, you can build up anything else that requires grass or colorless energy on your bench. This card would be absolutely cracked in Pocket if this was a 1-for-1 carryover, which is why it makes sense to have a completely different attack. Having high ramp damage and energy ramp built to the same card, with both accessible on turn 1, with no restrictions on flexibility, is just way too much for the game in its current state. However, this speaks volumes to the difference in power between the 4th generation's formats and Pokemon Pocket if this card would destroy all of Pocket's metagame while being non-competitive in its debut generation. The next card to discuss is Genetic Apex's Alakazam. Illustrated by Koki Sato, Alakazam in Genetic Apex is very similar to the previously discussed Executor. Both of these Pokemon have the Psychic attack that looks to do the same thing, deal more damage based on the number of energies attached to the opposing Pokemon. The core difference is that Alakazam is a Stage 2 and requires only 3 energy, leading it to attack on curve for a lower base damage and a higher effect damage. Overall, Alakazam has seen some rogue play in Pocket, usually as anti-meta tech cards when ramp is particularly common. Pokemon like Celebi and Giratina EX are vulnerable due to their desire to attach many energy, with Alakazam KOing both at 3 energy attached, and limiting their ability to hit back due to its 130 HP pool, and Giratina EX requiring 4 energy. However, Alakazam sees much less play than it otherwise would, due to its relatively low HP pool and status as a Stage 2 Pokemon. In Mysterious Treasures, Alakazam possessed a Pokepower that would be extremely useful in Pocket. Power Cancel allows you to interact with your opponent on their turn, which currently you cannot do in Pocket. When your opponent uses a Pokepower, you can discard 2 cards to cancel out that power. This would be absolutely devastating to decks like Giratina. Completely invalidating Pokepowers, or in this case, Pokemon abilities, would make Alakazam a very powerful anti-meta threat. Its attack, which for the same cost as its Pocket version, deals only 50 damage, and then also reduces damage Alakazam takes from Stage 2 Pokemon by 30. This is really weak, and you'd only be running Alakazam for its Power Cancel, not its attack. However, in Generation 4, this is not enough to crack the meta, hence its lack of use in any relevant deck list. The last card from Mysterious Treasures is Kagemaru Himono's Mr. Mime from Genetic Apex. Mr. Mime has 80 HP and 1 attack for 2 energy that deals 30 damage, which is Barrier Attack. This is a laughably low amount of damage for 2 energy, but it is supposed to be made up for in the effect of reducing damage taken by 20. This means that Mr. Mime is looking to be a stalling Pokemon as you set up on your bench. However, it requires 2 energy to function, effectively putting you behind 2 turns trying to get set up, which is really, really bad. As such, there are no decks that have any interest in playing this card. Was this the same case in Mysterious Treasures? Well, let's take a look at what it has to offer. First, it has the Pokebody of Airy Wall, which prevents damage done to Mr. Mime from attacks from Pokemon with 2 or less energy attached. And if Mime Jr. is underneath Mr. Mime, that applies to effects as well. This is significantly better than Mr. Mime in Pocket, to the point that Mr. Mime would be a staple stall card in many decks if it had this ability. Its attack Trick Play is a bit complicated, but basically is a coin flip to deal 50 or take 20 damage, which is pretty irrelevant due to its chance of self-damage. Mr. Mime here clearly just wants to sit out in the active slot and wall up while Pokemon are built up on the bench, which is exactly what it was designed to do in Pocket, just to a much worse degree. If Mr. Mime just had the Airy Wall ability in Pocket, it would have seen significantly more play than it currently does. That said, the format in Generation 4 was just too much for this Pokemon, and therefore it saw no actual meta play, even though it would have seen much, much more in Pocket. Secret Wonders was released on November 7th, 2007, and was the 3rd set of the 4th generation. It continued on the theme of Pokemon Level X and held items attached to Pokemon, though it also had several alternative forms of Sinnoh Pokemon, such as Gastrodon East Sea and Gastrodon West Sea. The only Pokemon from Secret Wonders, and the last Pokemon on this list, is Kokiseido's Bulbasaur, which is part of the Chansey Pick, Magnemite, and Bulbasaur promo event. This Bulbasaur has the exact same stats as the common one from Genetic Apex, and the 1-star full art version. Bulbasaur in Pocket has seen some rogue play as part of Venusaur Immortal stall builds. However, its utility has been limited due to a lack of grass ramp, especially early on, with the only real version of ramp being in Leafeon EX, and potentially superior, depending on how you define ramp. In addition, fire has been in the format in one way or another, and counters Venusaur, especially looking at Charizard EX, which can kill it in one hit. This severely limits Venusaur's staying power, and relegates it to rogue status. What about Bulbasaur in Generation 4? For starters, Bulbasaur has the 0 energy cost attack I talked about at the beginning of this video, which is pretty solid for what it's worth. Shake Vine, for no energy, puts the opposing Pokemon to sleep guaranteed. While sleep is a pretty weak status, it is really good for a no energy attack. Its second attack, Bullet Seed, for the same energy cost as its counterpart in Pocket, does 10 damage per coin flip for up to a total of 40 damage, which again is the same amount as its Pocket counterpart, just now on a coin flip. However, these similarities do not end here. Venusaur from the same set has the exact same attack as Venusaur EX from Genetic Apex, called Giant Bloom. In Pocket, Giant Bloom does 100 damage and guaranteed heals for 30, while in Secret Wonders, Giant Bloom deals 60 and heals for 40 on a coin flip. Secret Wonders Venusaur also has a very powerful ability that Pocket Venusaur EX does not, which is on a coin flip, you can either sleep, burn, or poison the opposing Pokemon. This shows a strong continuity between the two lines in their respective generations, and quite a bit of similarities between the two. However, I would lean towards the Secret Wonders line being a bit stronger because while both are very stall-focused builds, Secret Wonders has the added status conditions to put pressure on your opponents, rather than just out-healing them. That said, Venusaur and Bulbasaur by extension appeared on no list we could find. And that is all of the Pokemon from Generation 4's set releases in 2006 and 2007. I think it is super interesting how similar some of these cards are, and yet the older cards seem much stronger, even though they saw less play in their generation on average than their counterparts do in Pocket. This does show that there's still a ton of design space for cards as they're introduced in Pocket, particularly cards like Mr. Mime. If you like this, please check out our other videos on card arts, and please do like and subscribe. We plan on getting these out monthly to bi-weekly, depending on the interest.